for those of you that are on, we have about 58 folks that are in the audience. I know we can't necessarily see you right now. I know that some people that I know personally that know some of the other folks that are going to be on the panel today. So we appreciate you being here. There's a million other places you could be. We think this is a very important conversation. The Equitable Commute Project is an initiative to get New York moving again. And I love that phrase, to get us moving in by providing 10,000 subsidized micromobility vehicles to lower income frontline workers. It's been a project that we've been sort of cooking up for a long time. So it's really exciting to sort of in this springtime mode to get it out there for you folks to be exposed and understand and learn. In addition to having an immediate impact on the lives of those who have gotten us through this pandemic, the Equitable Commute Project, the ECP, will help to shape the future of transportation policy in New York and beyond. So a few just minor logistics. The bathrooms, I'm just joking. If we were in person, obviously that would be the conversation about where the bathrooms were and where there was coffee in the back of the room and some fruit and some bagels and some danishes from some place nearby. Unfortunately, we're not in person yet, but I look forward to seeing you all. And if you see anybody on this panel, out in the streets, out on their bikes, walking around on transit, say hello and act like you know somebody. A few logistics. So we have a bunch of speakers today, including a short presentation and a panel discussion. We'll run until about 11:15. We left time in this process for some questions. So obviously, please chime in. You can use the Q&A function to ask your question to any of the speakers. And we'll get to as many of your questions as we can. We hope that you're going to be curious and thoughtful in how you approach this. So looking forward to that conversation. Are there any logistics that I missed? I think that we're good. Okay, great. So why don't we I'm going to start. Will, we're going to start with you. Is that okay? Great. I'll just dive in real quick. Will Kennedy, and just to give you context again, my name is Ibrahim Abdul Mateen. I've been working on this project from the very beginning, and I'm going to be guiding you through this agenda today. So Will Kennedy is the Senior Program Officer for the UN Office of Partnerships. He promotes new partnerships with corporations, foundations, and civil society to support the UN's work. And that work includes facilitating the identification and development of high impact projects. This is a high impact project, and it's part of the NYC, part of the Invest NYC SDG, which we'll go into more detail later, which is a multi-year initiative at NYU Stern Center for Sustainable Business. He is a master connector of people with purpose across the entire world. So Will, I'm going to hand it over to you to kick this off. And then I'll just really quickly, as we get Cecilia on, I'll just drop it over to you, Will. And then as Cecilia comes on, we can pass it to her as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Ibrahim. And thank you, Mariana, for the opportunity to lend my enthusiastic support to the Equitable Commute Project from my vantage point here at the United Nations. Well, actually at my home on behalf of the United Nations. I really applaud the work that's been done by the collaborating team for this project at the Center for Sustainable Business at NYU Stern, as well as the support of the Economic Development Corporation of New York City and the other collaborating partners for their leadership of this effort. This initiative is especially inspiring example of a public-private alliance that advances the visions, the values, and the priorities of the Sustainable Development Goals in New York City by demonstrating an equitable and sustainable transportation model that is premised on the notion of leaving no one behind. It is beautifully aligned with the intention of Sustainable Development Goal 11 in particular, which aims to make cities more inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. I love the ambition, the substance, and the symbolic importance of this pilot project and its intention to get New York moving again in the wake of the ongoing COVID pandemic by providing 10,000 subsidized micro-mobility vehicles to lower-income frontline workers. As we all know, the pandemic has brought the challenges of income inequality and economic recovery and racial equity issues into laser focus. And this initiative succeeds in responding to these imperatives in a very compelling, impactful, and highly visible way, in my view. I believe this project has high potential for replication in other cities across the United States and in the wider world. And I encourage everybody on the call today to explore how they can collaborate as a partner and supporter of this excellent initiative. So thank you so much.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Will. And I just want to just dive in real quick. And I mean, it's really an honor, Will, for you to weigh in and give us that note of sort of support and approval. It's really important. So I thank you, and thank you very much. Cecilia Kushner is on. She's the Executive Vice President for Planning Division at New York City's Economic Development Corporation. She leads large multidisciplinary teams to deliver on some of the most complex urban planning and development projects in New York City. As part of her role, she oversees $1 billion of active projects geared towards delivering infrastructure and amenities and improving quality of life for New Yorkers across the 5 boroughs. The EDC is leading a number of essential projects to get New Yorkers moving again. Remember that phrase, get New Yorkers moving again after COVID, and has been absolutely critical for us as a thought partner. And also, just as a note, she is a total planning nerd, and she's been in the trenches with planning on projects all throughout the city. And I've worked with you directly on some of the most difficult community problems that we've had. Oh, sorry, someone said you can't see my video. Sorry about that. And I just want to it's such a blessing to see you here in this conversation. And we're continuing this process of trying to solve problems. So Cecilia, please, if you could weigh in.
Thank you so much. That was so sweet and generous, and it's wonderful to see you this morning. So good morning, everyone. As Ibrahim mentioned, I work for the Economic Development Corporation, and we're one of the advisors of this initiative, and so we're very excited by this collaboration. We really believe that bikes and scooters are going to be a big part of the story of how New York City comes back. And at the core of what EDC does is the strong belief that safe transportation and equitable transportation is critical to economic development, and that we need to be able to give people access to transportation in order for them to access jobs and the true economic opportunities that they deserve and that they can work towards. And one of the things we like to do is to do exactly what we're all doing this morning, which is to facilitate conversations between the private sector, the public sector, community leaders. And I know there are a number of people from Hunts Point and the Hunts Point Forward initiative that are partners with us. So I'm excited to see them all here as well, bridging these two words. What we've seen a lot during COVID is that people are longing for a different way of being able to move during the city. As mentioned, some of the work we did was facilitated the donation and repairs of hundreds of bikes for hospital workers, mainly outside of Manhattan. And it really, I think, for us, continued to demonstrate that New Yorkers are longing for different types of transportation. And what we've seen is really an acceleration of transportation trends. So whereas biking in New York City kind of doubled pre-COVID in the last decade, just over the last year, we've seen increase in bike usage by 30%. So we think that being able to bring New Yorkers back to work and making sure that all communities and all New Yorkers have access to safe and equitable and affordable transportation is really critical to get New Yorkers move again and our economy move again. And we're very excited to be able to do this in the Bronx. We believe that increased access for employees and residents of the Bronx who have access to jobs, like the Bronx is a growing industrial and commercial borough, and deserve access to these jobs without needing to get on the subway, go to Manhattan, and find their way into a different line, into a different part of the borough is extremely important. So we're just really happy to be here. We think this is a very special moment to have this conversation in the history of the city. We really want to take advantage of the strong desire that people have shown for different conversations around transportation, mobility, and equitable access to jobs. And just thrilled to the collaboration and looking forward to more. And I'll pass it back.
Great. Thanks to Cecilia and Will for your introductions. I'm Mariana Koval, and I'm the director of Invest NYC SDG, an initiative at the Center for Sustainable Business at NYU Stern. Our purpose is to engage the private sector in supporting New York City's and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We want to spur private financial investment, ranging from philanthropy to impact investments to more traditional finance. Supporting sustainable mobility stands high on our list. And I'm joined today by Danny Harris, the Executive Director of Transportation Alternatives and our program partner. A widely respected advocacy organization, TA has been at the forefront of reclaiming New York City streets from cars for people for nearly 50 years, organizing and advocating for walking, biking, and public transit. Together, Danny and I want to share with you the Equitable Commute Project. We go to slide 2, please. So here's an overview of this 2-year pilot and its impact. You've heard it already, but we want to subsidize 50% of the cost of a micromobility vehicle, an e-bike, bike, or e-scooter for 10,000 lower income essential workers. The impact will be measurable: reduced commute times, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, new green jobs, spurring critical city, state, and federal policy to for credit purchase incentives and infrastructure construction. But let me tell you about the genesis of the project. Last July, I had a call with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We were discussing the idea of extending a pilot that had begun in Lisbon, Portugal. The goal was to enlist corporations in New York City to commit to sustainable transportation measures. But remember, it was July 2020, in the midst of a continuing global pandemic, but also in the midst of a long-needed American reawakening with renewed, insistent calls for racial justice following George Floyd's murder. We talked, and I wanted to think about it. And later that afternoon, by a coincidence, I had a call with Melinda Hansen from Electric Avenue, now another program partner, and we were scheduled to talk about sustainable transportation generally. So we talked, what's the place of sustainability in this moment, and how can it be advanced? The UN SDGs anchored and framed our thinking. What could we do in New York City? Who should be the focus? Where should we begin? And how can we catalyze long-term change? As we talked, we realized that New York City had an incredible opportunity in the face of these crises. Next slide. COVID-19 had laid bare transportation inequities, particularly for lower income and essential workers. The pandemic made a transportation crisis a 5-alarm fire. Next slide. So cars, whether they're personal vehicles, rideshare, Uber, Lyft, car share, or car services, are not the sustainable answer for anyone in New York City. Everyone talks about Carmageddon, and cars aren't readily accessible for lower income New Yorkers. Next slide. So we studied, we analyzed the data and considered the need. We learned that New York City has more than 1 million essential workers, 250,000, nearly 250,000 people are lower income, and most are people of color who live in the so-called outer boroughs. While New York City leads the world as one of the top 10 public transit systems, people want options, and there's a need for mobility that complements public transit for those in transit deserts. Micromobility, e-bikes, e-scooters, bikes, for all ages and fitness levels. We looked around the world, London, Paris, to US cities that have responded to the pandemic with micromobility, Denver, Detroit, and in our own hometown, where City Bike, EDC, and Transportation Alternatives have created bike programs. We know from a recent study of over 100 European cities the critical importance of pop-up supportive bike infrastructure. If you build it, they will bike. It's a chicken or egg conundrum, but we're confident in New York City that if you bike, they will build it. Next slide. We studied demand. We did a quick survey in 2 healthcare systems in the Bronx. We found over 600 employees wanted an e-bike. We decided to pilot the pilot in the Bronx. Next slide. Penny, Justin, Sharon are essential workers in the Bronx, and they've made their case. substantially reduced commute times, major convenience, and lower commute costs. Next slide. We see ownership of micromobility as one piece of transportation justice, and yet cost is an impediment for lower income New Yorkers. But subsidies and low-cost financing for people without credit histories can bridge this gap. So we reached out and we built a large collaboration with Transportation Alternatives, Electric Avenue, the HOPE program, Barretto Bay Strategies, NYU Rudin, and far beyond. Supported by EDC and DOT, we're continuing to grow a broad citywide coalition. Next slide. Danny, take it from here.
Hi, thank you, Mariana. And thank you all for joining us today. I'm Danny Harris. I'm honored to be the Executive Director at Transportation Alternatives. And I just wanted to get to a bit of the why you're here, what we're looking for, and just to sort of dig into some more of the specifics. So a few pieces that I just want to add on to what's already been shared is that commute time is one of the single biggest indicators of moving people out of generational poverty. So as we are thinking about ECP, what we want to present this as a yes and. This is on top of the work that's being done, especially with federal support to build out and expand public transit across the city, to build upon the bike boom that Transportation Alternatives and our partners, especially at DOT, have been fueling for decades now. And this is simply another way of keeping New Yorkers moving and thinking about how these benefits can not only impact the 10,000 who would be part of this program, but the ripple effects would sort of play out across communities and citywide, even as we sort of start this pilot in the Bronx. So we are looking to raise $6.25 million in corporate support in advance of this program, which would help to build this out over the course of 2 years. Again, this would be to provide 10,000 essential workers with 50% cost towards the purchase of a micromobility tool. We have a number of other partners, which I'm excited to share with you. But so when we talk about why this is happening now and why we need your support, it's because, again, New York City has proven that it is a transportation leader across the nation. When we look at the projects that have happened from the arrival of City Bike to Vision Zero, this is another way where the city, in partnership with nonprofits in the corporate sector, is creating a new model that puts transportation first. So for whatever issue that you are working on, whether it's on the CSR front or trying to bring back your employees to the office, transportation is no longer a myopic issue that is just for the transit nerds like us who think about this all day. You cannot solve economic recovery, how people will get back to school, how essential workers, especially given that healthcare workers have the longest commute time in New York, without fundamentally addressing the injustices that have played out in transportation and the opportunity to propel it first. So in advancing this project, what we are looking to do is to create a new national model supported by legislation that we hope will advance both at the federal and at the state level that will help to subsidize the purchase of e-products that are not just e-vehicles, but e-micromobility, which are going to be critical for our cities moving forward. And I would just add that if you look now at a place like Copenhagen and Amsterdam, e-bikes are now or soon to be outselling regular bikes. So this is clearly the future, especially in terms of helping to accelerate commutes. In a place like Amsterdam, the average commute distance is almost 9 kilometers. So these are all things that are possible when we build out a system that connects more people to opportunity, especially to essential workers. We've thought holistically about a program that is not just, again, about bikes. We're not talking about bikes. We're talking about opportunity. We're talking about addressing racial injustice, climate injustice. We're talking about how our city moves forward. We've thought about how to address the 50% of the cost that we cannot provide by going to Spring Bank and looking for opportunities of providing low interest loans to underbanked or those who may not have or have challenging credit histories. We're working with SwiftMile to build out the infrastructure about where these devices can be charged. We're building a workforce development program with the HOPE program, specifically to address the maintenance and operations of these vehicles, and then working with local partners like UNI on secure parking, recognizing that these are going to be expensive devices. They need to be stored in a place that are accessible and that are safe for individuals, especially given that this would be a very significant investment. Transportation Alternatives is honored and humbled to have worked across neighborhoods now for almost 50 years. especially in the Bronx. We would be on the forefront of community engagement, helping to get the bikes out, doing the education, and then just as we've done of ensuring that as the bikes and other micromobility tools are delivered, that we're building out advocacy programs that can deliver protected infrastructure, whether it's on the bridges that will connect or the streets that will move people around. We have a really robust team that we've mentioned. We have NYU Stern Center with Mariana, who's obviously leading the effort on our corporate engagement. We have Melinda from Electric Avenue, who's helping us as a thought leader on micromobility. We were working with the HOPE program again on job training and helping to sort of build this out as a workforce development program. The Rudin Center will be helping us with our research. And then we have obviously Springbank that will help us with the other financing. Barretto Bay Strategies is going to help us with our launch in the Bronx. When we think about, what the hopeful benefit is to you, we think that there are no shortage of them. When we look about even the partnership of City Bike and Bike Share, we see this as an opportunity not just for CSR and for branding, but also to help to set sort of a new trend of what New York can do and how the corporate partners can give back to New Yorkers, especially those who've been on the front lines of this pandemic, and will help us to move forward. We also see that, again, this is building out another leg of advocacy to build more transportation alternatives that support all New Yorkers. Again, when we can build out a network, it supports everybody. It's important to recognize that when you look at a place like London, the case for transforming streets was actually led by businesses. Businesses recognize that getting their employees to work safely, especially with things like protected bike lanes, was a critical tool for reviving the downtown core and has been sort of a driver for helping to build out business support for protected bike infrastructure. We've seen that obviously in other places of New York. We see this as an opportunity not just, again, to support 10,000 essential workers, but also to build out a more equitable transportation system that works for everybody. When we look at the finances, again, this is a 2-year program where we're in the process of raising $6.25 million. The vast majority of those funds are obviously going to go to product costs, to products to bring in the tools that are needed, with minor costs that are obviously going for project management and operations, which obviously we would each take on our responsibility, TA as the implementing partner, helping to do the on the ground work. As we launch, we will launch with our pilot of a pilot up in the Bronx in Q2 to Q3 of 2021. And then we would 2021, and then we would focus on a citywide rollout across all 5 boroughs in the next 2 years. We have Sarah Kaufman here from Rudin Center, who is going to be building out the back end and the data to help us understand how the project is working, what the ripple effects are in terms of impact, not only to help us sort of scale the project, to help tell the story, but also to help to make tweaks along the way to ensure that it's most impactful for the individuals who are receiving the micromobility devices and also for the program in general. We have a growing coalition of partners. We're really excited to welcome these and others, and we ask that you join us. We think this is an incredible opportunity for the city, for most importantly for essential workers, and for a shared partnership about moving the city forward, especially those who've been on the front lines helping us get through this pandemic. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to turn the floor over.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you so much. That was perfect. That was awesome. Thank you, Mariana. That was great to kind of set the tone as well. Really appreciate you all for doing that, for moving us forward. We're going to create, there's going to definitely be times for us to have questions and comments as we get through, but right now I want to shift us into our panel. So first up on our panel, we have some really, you just mentioned Sarah Kaufman. She's the Associate Director of the Rudin Center, NYU Rudin Center for Transportation. She's basically the cutting edge expert on transportation technologies, and she's going to bring that into this process, as Danny just elaborated. Michael Rapogel, I think I said your name correctly. Please forgive me. He's the New York City DOT Deputy Commissioner for Policy since 2016. So basically, he's the strategic advisor on all programs across the agency, including Vision Zero, micromobility, electrification, and all the federal and regional policies. He's a really important member of New York City DOT, and he's definitely a visionary member of that team as well. We also have Jennifer Mitchell, the Executive Director of the HOPE program, which is a not-for-profit that for almost 40 years has trained and placed and supported folks that are underemployed in New York City. and helping them build sustainable careers in the growing sectors, including the green economy. She's crucial to this conversation. Along those lines, we have Don Eversley, is the Senior Director for Planning and Capital Projects and Community Development at Urban Health Plan. They basically run a bunch of federally qualified health centers and school-based health clinics, not just in the South Bronx, but in Queens and Central Harlem communities. And a note of respect to the passing of the founder, Doc, who recently passed in 2020, if I'm not mistaken. Respect to him. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you, Don, as well. And then also to round out the panel, Her Majesty, Amanda Septimo, just joking. She represents New York's 84th Assembly District and serves on the Assembly's Banking, Environmental Conservation, and Education Committees. That's a really good thread, Amanda, so respect to you. She's a lifelong resident of the South Bronx. And we're gonna hear from all of them. If you guys could all make sure you turn on, okay, great, everybody's ready to go. All right, so, let's get started with you, Michael, if you don't mind. I know DOT has made a number of new investments in cycling infrastructure in the city. We know DOT is focused on Vision Zero. This has been a really incredible sort of past 10 to 15 years about what's happening with DOT and how you guys are really pushing the needle. Can you tell us about what's next for expanding this infrastructure, and what's the role that DOT sees e-bikes playing in the future of transit?
Well, I think, the city is building protected bike lanes at a rate higher than any previous administration. We have aspirations to continue to accelerate that pace, and along with our open streets initiatives, we're expanding our city bike program in partnership with Lyft to 40,000 shared bikes over the next couple of years, which will more than double the size of the system from today. We've launched a successful e-cargo bike pilot that has over 350 cargo bikes now operating in Manhattan, and that will be, we expect that'll be expanding, has a lot of potential. I think there's a lot to be done as we expand bicycling to be an ever more important part of the city's transportation modes. And I think the Equitable Commute Project is something that, although we're not an official sponsor, we're pleased to see the efforts of that project and to see it advance. And we've begun to discuss the potential to align the Equitable Commute Project with the city's many efforts to expand safe and equitable access for people living in transit deserts while reducing air pollution and greenhouse emissions. As the Equitable Commute Project develops, we want to see it provide strong safety education outreach to its beneficiaries, as well as engage the private sector in expanding access to secure parking for micromobility devices at workplaces, homes, and transit stations. And we look forward to further discussions with those guiding the Equitable Commute Project in targeting how the project's developed and expands beyond the initial phase in the Bronx. This whole initiative is one that frankly reminds me a lot of a project that I helped start back in 1984, Bikes Not Bombs, where we recycled over 10,000 bicycles to teachers and health workers in Nicaragua, and initially gave away those bikes, but very soon after the first few months of operation, started to sell the bikes on low-cost loans to teachers and health workers, and then took the capital from those loans and put it back into developing and capitalizing a bicycle assembly industry in Nicaragua, which today employs thousands of people. And we created the seeds of that with these donated bicycles. They were donated through bike clubs and churches. So the same kind of model, I think, here, but with corporate support, could happen much more quickly and with much more impact. This is the kind of initiative that can really help working class people, in particular essential workers, make connections in ways that are more efficient than the public transport system in many cases. This initiative will help New York meet its greenhouse gas goals and its goals to help increase equity of transportation and reduce air pollution. I'm particularly struck as I look at the research about how e-bikes get ridden 2 to 3 times farther distances by their users than conventional pedal bicycles. And we're seeing that in the city bike system here in New York as well. That really is part of expanding the base of users, and among the base of people who use bikes, expanding the range of trips that they can use bikes for. It helps access for people with moderate disabilities who have trouble walking long distances. I mean, I have ankle troubles, and I can bike a lot better than I can walk long distances. So, I think in so many ways, this Equitable Commute Initiative is a valuable public-private partnership that offers potential to our city. So I'm delighted to be here on this panel, and delighted that my agency will be continuing discussions with the ECP organizers about how we can align our efforts in the future.
Thank you, Michael. That was excellent. That helps us give some context also to how it connects to larger policy goals, particularly the climate goals, which are really important to many people at the moment. Sarah, I'd like to dive in really quickly with you. Given, we're in the middle of, so we see the light at the end of the pandemic, but we know that there's been some excellent research that you've led about commute patterns throughout the pandemic. And what are some of the major trends that you've documented? And like specifically, if you could add in what has been the role of micromobility, and what can we do to continue to support cycling and micromobility as a transportation option?
Sure, thank you for the great question. So at the NYU Rudin Center for Transportation, we, with our partner Sam Schwartz, led a major research project into transportation patterns during the pandemic. I think kind of the most surprising one that I saw was last March, when we were kind of just going into lockdown. City bike rides reached record highs, which is pretty funny, which is pretty ironic, because people didn't have anywhere to go during lockdown, but they were really looking for a way to get around. We did see drops in subway usage throughout the city, often about 90% during lockdown. But those numbers were, people were still using the subway a lot more in areas like the South Bronx than they were in Manhattan, which points to the essential nature of the subway for essential workers who were still getting around, still going to work every day. And the best thing that we can do is provide mobility options. We did see a lot of city bike use throughout the pandemic, even though the patterns were different. People weren't going to Midtown, but they were going throughout the city. We saw an increase in the interest in Revel, the shared moped service, which both Revel and City Bike provided essential worker memberships. And Revel saw about 12% of their rides go to restaurant delivery workers, which they provided at no cost. And City Bike provided free annual memberships to a lot of essential workers. And the most interesting part that I see is that while during typical times, women have lower rates of city bike usage. Women take only a quarter of city bike trips during typical times. Because women outnumber men in terms of essential worker proportions, women were signing up for these free memberships at higher rates. So a great way to get a greater diversity in city bike or in bicycle usage is to provide lower cost or free memberships to these services so that our essential workers can get around.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. I want to just quickly jump to Jennifer. Jennifer, are you ready for me to throw a question at you?
Yep, go for it.
So I'm curious from the perspective of workforce development, and then after this, we're going to go to you, Don, and then Amanda. But specifically, what role will Hope play in this project for the Equitable Commute Project?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ibrahim. I just have to, before I give the Hope part of Equitable Commute, I have to tell Michael, you just brought me back when you mentioned the Bikes Not Bombs program. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Nicaragua from 1995 to 1997, and Bikes Not Bombs was a was obviously a real support to people needing to get around, but it also connects to this conversation because it provided lots of jobs and lots of employment opportunities in Nicaragua when I was a Peace Corps volunteer there during the 90s. And then the other point I wanted to make is when we got involved in this project, Hope got a call in about late June to find out if we had staff who were located in the Bronx residentially and also worked out of our Bronx office, and if they would be interested in an e-bike or an e-scooter for their commute. And I joke with staff that I've been executive director of Hope for a decade. I got the fastest response to an email that I've ever gotten from more people than I've ever gotten it. I mean, everybody was interested and everybody was excited. And I think you're going to hear more from Don and Assemblywoman Septimo about the long kind of onerous commutes just because of the way the borough is set up. But it really would make a huge difference in so many people's lives. So Hope and the Equitable Commute Project. For me, and the angle we're taking is it's jobs, 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 it's careers, it's green jobs that are inclusive and equitable and giving people the skill sets that they need to keep up with the green economy, the very quick, fast changing economy. And so we all saw bike shops in New York City in the beginning of the pandemic were overwhelmed. There was more demand for people needing bike mechanics than people could actually respond to. If we, through this project, put 10,000 more e-bikes and e-scooters on the streets for essential workers, plus all the other projects that Michael mentioned that are going on simultaneously in the city, there is going to continue to be jobs created. And we need to make sure that people who might not have the access to get the training to become bike mechanics or to become drivers for ECP or for City Bike get that training they need. And so while we're super excited about all the other implications of getting 10,000 bikes into the hands of essential workers, we're really excited to be part of it from a jobs perspective and making sure that folks from low-income communities of color are given the training they need to get access to those jobs. And that's really important. And the thing about it, and what Hope has done for 40 years, is we are a holistic workforce development training program. So we don't just train someone to get that job. We say to folks, when you're hope for life. And so we continue to support people to continue to upskill, to access other things that they need. So Hope has digital literacy, financial literacy, mental health services, and all these wraparound supports so that people won't just get that first job as a bike mechanic, but they will also get on a career path that we will help them to build as this new industry, this burgeoning sector starts to reveal what the career paths will look like there.
I love that. And it makes me think of all the folks that I've seen throughout the past year, you know, when I've gone on my own rides around the Bronx and just sort of people are ready. People are already tinkering and creating and ready to do that, but we're also ready to work. So I think that's exciting. Don, if we could go to you, obviously you manage a massive healthcare network, the footprints in 3 boroughs, but I think your workforce is one of the largest in Southeast Bronx. And I'm just curious if you could reflect a bit on not only the commuting patterns in the Hunts Point Longwood community, but also the staff transportation between clinic locations in your network, if you could.
Sure. So we have about 22, 24 clinical locations, and my job is actually building the clinic. So that's why the numbers isn't exact, because we're working on 3 new ones right now, including one in Assembly Member Septimo's district. I'm proud to say, Tres Puentes. And about 12 of those are in school buildings. So we'll take those out for the time being because those are not open. Most of our facilities are in the South Bronx. We have one in Harlem and one in Northeast Queens and Corona, which are also very dense neighborhoods where most of the, I would say, certainly the patients or clients and a good part of our staff are local. It's mixed. I think our CEO, Paloma Hernandez, estimated initially our demand in the Bronx might be 50 to 75 vehicles, and that's probably out of a Bronx workforce of 500 to 600 people. I think it's going to be a situation where people will wait and see how it goes. Our workforce is complicated. We certainly have a good amount of people that live in the Bronx, but we have quite a few that live in Westchester, including Lower Westchester. So I think it's a combination of how far you commute, the exact nature of your commute. So in my case, I only walk a couple of blocks to the train and only walk a couple of blocks on the other end. So my train commute is actually rather good. And for a variety of factors, I probably wouldn't substitute my commute for a micro device. But there are others that, just because the proximity to public transportation, there are pockets in the Bronx that are just remote to particularly subway. So you're taking buses to the subway, which gets more complicated. We have pockets like Soundview and Throgs Neck, two working class communities where, just physically they're remote from the subway train, but they're not that far. So, for example, from our base at Southern Boulevard and Westchester Avenue, Soundview is probably a mile and a half tops as the crow flies, but it's really complicated to get there because of the Bruckner, because of the train patterns that are all above the Bruckner, and only one or two bus lines that penetrate that neighborhood. So you can make that distance probably very simply by a micro device. And there's a number of situations like that where individual connections work to home work really well. And then there's others that quite frankly don't. One of the concerns we have is just some of the logistics that may work themselves out over time in terms of, vehicle storage, vehicle parking. There's been a number of small micro vehicle projects and with scooters and bikes, and in some cases, sort of the vehicles kind of got left all over the place, and which created problems for building owners, for merchants, for shoveling snow and other things. So I think as we get more uptake, I think both the city and users need to be mindful of, if we really put thousands of more vehicles on the street, just like if you're going to put thousands of more trucks or thousands of more cars, they don't automatically get orderly arranged, right? Because they're smaller, but they do take up space, and people do tend to leave them sometimes in kind of haphazard ways, which creates problems for other people. One other thing I'm observed is that with another hat that I wear, I'm executive director of the Hunts Point Economic Development Corporation, which is a business service nonprofit for industrial South Bronx. So really Hunts Point, Port Morris, Longwood, and adjacent neighborhoods. And there as well, there are some opportunities, I think, to help some of the workers that work in more remote areas. For example, deep into Hunts Point, 2/3 of that peninsula is industrial, and particularly say the three food cooperatives are at a considerable distance from the subway, and sort of at the mercy of like one bus line. So that seems like an opportunity to, particularly since the city owns the property, to experiment with some scooter or bike pilot projects for workers at the food markets. Right now it's complicated to get there without cars. I mean, they work shifts. So there's some really late night shifts where bus service and train service are even more unreliable. And I think the advantage of the EDC controlling the real estate means that some of the resistance that we've heard in terms of docking stations, charging stations, and what have you, can be overcome, because all three markets have space, and ultimately, the city is the landlord. So I think there's some good opportunities there.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate that. That was great. You kind of gave us an overview of some of the things, the complexities of this, and also some of the opportunities. Appreciate that. Amanda, Assemblywoman, just, you're the local girl who's come back and helped make sure your borough and your district can be, as effective and as like amazing as it could possibly be. Can you just sort of lay out some of your thoughts here? And in particular, I'm thinking about some of the complex choices that people have to make, and thinking about not only the residents, but also some of the business owners and potential people that would be participating in helping this happen.
Sure. And thank you for having me today. This is an exciting conversation, and I'm excited to be here with you all. I think Don actually made really critical points around the accessibility issues. Specifically, I think about how from Hunts Point to Yankee Stadium will take you about 15 minutes in a car. It'll take you about 35 minutes on public transit. And when you think about Yankee Stadium as this kind of focal point economic engine for the South Bronx, that level of access just doesn't make sense when you're talking about South Bronx residents, right? From a transit perspective. And I think this is something that we see all over the place, right? There are plenty of studies that tell you the poorer you are, the longer you will commute to work. And that will sort of shape your economic opportunity and your job opportunities. And I think as we think about the South Bronx, not only as part of an economic engine that exists within the city, but thinking about meaningful economic development within the borough, within the South Bronx itself, that means that we have to give people opportunities to get around the borough and to be able to find a home base and build one that is easily accessible, not only as a resident and as a commuter, but also as a business. When we talk about sort of sourcing local talent and making sure, I think anyone who owns a business will tell you that the closer workers live to work, the better things run, right? The more flexibility you have, the easier it is to manage. And so we need to be able to create those opportunities within the borough, or we're always going to be sort of trapped in this dynamic where we're sort of focused in this kind of extraction economy, right? Where we interact with other parts of the city in order to fulfill whatever economic development means. And, people talk about the area as the poorest congressional district in the country because it has been for some time. And I think that requires a meaningful reimagining of economic development. And this is certainly a part of it. How people move is certainly a part of it. And I think one of the interesting things that we saw during the pandemic, when bus service was free, we saw a 20% increase of people riding buses, right? And then those people, right when fares were reinstated, those numbers went right back down. So we know that people want to move. We know that when they have opportunities to move, they do it. And we know that spurs economic development, that spurs economic growth. And that's really something that I'm focused on. And how do we sort of tackle these systemic problems? And then I think beyond their kind of individual silos, right? I think it's easy to think about transit separate from economic development, separate from quality of life. But the reality is the poorer you are, the longer you travel for work. Separately from that, poorer children hear 1 million less words by the time they're 3 years old compared to their richer counterparts, right? That's because they spend less time with their parents in the home, et cetera. So all of these issues are interconnected. And when we're talking about equity, bringing equity to the South Bronx, to New York State, I think we have to recognize the synergy between all these issues and how tackling one issue feels good. But we're really tackling them all if we have the ability to think critically and think globally about it. And so I'm excited about this program because I think we're also on the state level exploring policies around how to ensure e-bikes and how to make sure that they're more widely accessible and feel like a sound investment, at least from a business perspective, but also from a resident and worker perspective. And I think that there's a lot to be said in terms of the improvement that we can make in terms of, again, the global kind of perspective. And then I think that, the final point is that you can't build a green economy without multimodal transit. You will not get there. And we have to be realistic about that. And so I think being realistic about that means that we also have to invest in these things. And again, not only from sort of a streetscape kind of physical needs perspective, physical infrastructure on the ground, but also in terms of creating transit opportunities for folks. And I think that this is a really exciting program that I think tackles a lot of those issues all at once. I'm really excited to support it in the ways that I can.
Thank you, Amanda. I just we have a little bit of time for a quick follow-up. I wanted to just throw it to you, Sarah, if you don't mind. You've heard a lot here. We heard a lot about the workforce potential, about the complexity, about sort of the nuance and the uniqueness of the Bronx and the challenges in the Bronx. Are there things that you're going to be looking for out of this pilot program that you think will help not only here, but in other parts of the city and potentially beyond?
Yeah, so thank you, Ibrahim, and thank you, Assembly Member. That was really informative. So there are a few different things that we'll look for here. So I think the most important is kind of uptake and ripple effects of this program. We see over and over that people don't start using shared modes unless they are invited by a friend or kind of introduced to the program by someone else. Chances are they won't just pick up a bike off the street and start riding it on their own. And so one really important aspect of this program is training people in city riding and seeing how that works when they start training their community members and how they can get around. It will also give us evidence. Hopefully we can start kind of tracking locations or travel patterns of some of the users, and that will present evidence for a greater need for bike lanes and protected routes in the Bronx, which doesn't have enough protected bike routes right now. So by showing where people want to go or where people are riding, where they feel comfortable riding, we can start to develop a set of evidence for what needs to be changed on the local streets. And finally, we can see what people's commute patterns how people's commute patterns have changed. As the Assembly Member said, sometimes the commute is an hour on transit, but maybe 20 minutes by e-bike. So we want some data on that to help prove the effectiveness of this program, both for improving the streetscape as well as showing how people's health and well-being and mental health has been improved through this program.
That's great. I think the health aspect is great. And I think the only thing I would add is just, I'm also very curious about the air quality indicators and sort of the measurements that could come out of this. And I know folks like Michael and other folks that's part of the conversation as well. What I'd like to do right now, in the interest of time and respecting all of you guys' energy and that you guys showed up today, to give a thanks to Don, to Jennifer, to Michael, to Assembly Member Septimo, to Sarah. Thank you guys so much for being on this panel. I'm going to turn it over to Melinda Hansen, who has been absolutely critical in pulling all of this together. She's sort of like the Kaiser Soze of this effort. And you could probably age yourself if you get that movie reference. But just Melinda, if you could just take it over and see if we could there seem to be some very intriguing questions that have come up.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you everybody who's spoken so far, and thank you, Ibrahim, for your excellent facilitation. I know that it's the top of the hour. We've scheduled until 11:15 so that we can ask some audience questions. Panelists, if you're able to stay until then, I'd appreciate it. It looks like there will be some that apply to the ECP core team, as well as some of the comments that you all just made. So the first question I would like to put out here, a couple of folks have asked it in a couple of different ways, is just about the outreach and how we intend to identify participants in the Equitable Commute Project. I'd like to ask Paul Lipson to explain the outreach that's been done to date and a little bit about how you see things going forward.
Sure, thank you, Melinda. We've worked with a network of community-based organizations, anchor institutions, and essential workplaces around the borough to do an initial scan. Who's interested, who has the capacity to potentially accommodate bike parking, what parts of the workforce would opt for e-bikes or e-scooters for commuting versus their current mode. And we've had a pretty thunderous response, as Jennifer indicated as well. And Urban Health Plan found that there's a real appetite for this. It hasn't been market tested, we have to acknowledge that, but we think the pipeline to the workforce is through the employers and their HR departments. It's also the pipeline to financing, because Spring Bank has an employee opportunity loan program, which enables people without much credit history to qualify for a loan, provided they have W-2 employment. And it's a great way to finance this, a very affordable way to make the 50% of the cost of the bike accessible to people who, are not earning six figures typically. So we have a great network. That's my response, Melinda.
Excellent, thank you. We have a question here about infrastructure, so I'll pass this one over to Michael Replogle. Leo Shirky is asking about the relationship between ridership of city bike and good, what you would consider to be strong bicycle infrastructure. So I'm hoping we can just make that a little bit more broad and talk about, what the DOT's plans are for expanding infrastructure and what kind of resulting ridership you may expect from those investments.
Well, it is a bit of a chicken and an egg thing, and we have, in fact, concentrated on developing bike infrastructure in the city in the past 15, 20 years in the places where there was the highest incidence of cycling. In the last couple of years, we've been giving a lot more attention to building out the bike network in areas that have a lot less cycling in the outer boroughs. Our Green Wave Plan, which was released a couple of years ago, lays out a framework for a number of different corridors that are getting new protected bike lane infrastructure now and in the next couple of years in places where the network's extremely incomplete. And we're seeing very strong uptake of cycling in neighborhoods. When you provide protected bike lanes, you get a lot more bike ridership. That happens in virtually every community that puts protected bike lane infrastructure in place. So it's a very important part of the equation. We're rolling out an e-scooter pilot in the southeastern Bronx this spring, and that will be expanding into a second phase, over the next year and a half. And we don't have enough infrastructure there to fully support extensive use of micromobility. So we're accelerating our plans to develop more protected bike lanes and marked bike lanes where that's the most expedient thing we can do in those neighborhoods. And we're also looking to build this out. As I think many people on the call may be aware, the City Council has required that DOT put together a bike master plan, which is due in about a year, and that will drive a lot of bike investment in coming years under a future administration, and we hope to continue to grow the pace of that as we build out the citywide bike network. We've got nowhere to go but up in terms of developing that, and I think we're getting, obviously there's still pushback in a lot of neighborhoods from parking loss that comes when you put in protected bike infrastructure. But we're seeing strong support as well in many communities. So this is going to be a partnership with communities, with the public and the private sector.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Michael. So one of the things that you guys have all heard in the presentation of the ECP is that we're really viewing this as a catalyst for bigger change. We, of course, are meeting this immediate need, but we're also helping to grow the broader bike industry, hopefully inspire additional new infrastructure, parking, charging, other types of industries. So we have a question here just about the sort of potential of growth for not only the jobs, but also manufacturing in New York City. So perhaps I'll open that up to Jennifer and to Amanda for your comments on what you see as the industry growth potential in New York City.
Assemblywoman, do you want to start or you want me to?
You can go ahead. Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted still in 2021.
I know the feeling. So we are, I mean, I will talk from a really micro perspective right now. I look at job lists for Hope every single week on where the people that are graduating from our programs are getting jobs, what kind of jobs they are, what industries they are. And we have 3 jobs last week that are in the micromobility space. We also, Danny from Transportation Alternatives mentioned a partner that we're working with as the Equitable Commute Project on parking for bikes, UNI. In addition to those 3 jobs last week, we have one of our graduates working as an intern at UNI. Yesterday, I got 2 other job descriptions from a potential ECP partner. So on a real micro level, we're seeing job opportunities pop up more frequently than we have historically in this space. And as New York recovers and as New York builds back better, and when you hear, you have state and federal infrastructure investments that are, in the millions and billions of dollars, all of that is going to require people going back to work. And we need to continue to build the infrastructure for micromobility too. So I think, though our labor market data is pretty sparse on specifically like micromobility, we are just experiencing anecdotally a lot of growth and a lot of interest and a lot of feelers out there for opportunity.
And in that same vein, I think zooming out, first, I love manufacturing. I love light manufacturing, and I think we need to do everything we can to preserve space for it in the South Bronx, especially when we're in rezonings, making sure that rezoning text protects that, those opportunities. And I think just again, to the point that I made earlier, as we grow the green economy, we can sort of anticipate some of the things that will come down the pike, right? Like solar paneling opportunities as solar farms develop. Now we're seeing sort of the e-bike space growing, but there are many other places that will grow, parts of the industry that will develop that I'm sure we can't quite imagine yet. And I think that really is the land of opportunity for our community by way of economic development, because these are industries that really lend themselves well for folks who come from non-traditional education backgrounds, of which we have a lot in our community, and makes it so that folks can have pathways to meaningful, sustainable careers as we build a meaningful, sustainable economy. And I think that that's being reflected on the state level as we kind of think about how we're going to be spending state dollars. The CLCPA mandates that we have to spend 35% of everything in impacted communities, of which the South Bronx will certainly be one. And so I think there's a lot of investment overall, and we want to make sure that we're sort of consistently aligning all of the pieces. And I think manufacturing is certainly an opportunity where we'll see a lot of growth, and want to make sure that we're preparing people and giving them opportunities accordingly.
And
Excellent.
just to emphasize, like what Assembly members said, the intersectionality of all of this, like the fact that like we're growing good jobs that are influencing a sustainable economy, that are letting people like earn money and put food on the table for their families and contribute to their communities in meaningful, real ways is like a little bit like intangible to measure, but so powerful.
And I would just add that that's exactly how I think you break cycles of poverty. And this is the kind of meaningful investment that we haven't seen for the South Bronx in decades, I would argue. And so I am really excited about this project because I do think it brings it all together in the way Jennifer just described.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, Melinda, I
Please.
think, the American jobs plan that the Biden administration announced this week also, provides a framework in which I think we could see vastly increased federal investment. Well, they're pledging $135 billion to support electrification of transportation. And I would hope that some piece of that will go to support micromobility electrification. There's a lot of evidence out there that some of the most cost-effective ways of electrifying vehicle miles of travel is with the lowest the speed, slowest vehicles that carry light loads. You need to carry very few batteries, and they can be very cost efficient compared to an electric car that accelerates 0 to 60 in 5 seconds, which is carrying a lot of batteries to enable that kind of power. So, I think we need to have that full spectrum of electrification, and we need to bring some of those jobs and manufacturing back to America as part of a Build Back Better initiative nationally. And I think we'll see that happen.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's not just a conversation that's happening in New York, but happening federally and also internationally. So it's a very exciting time. And I think we have just a couple of minutes left. So perhaps for one quick answer from Sarah Kaufman, we get a lot of questions about the relationship between micromobility and transit. If you could speak to that for just about 30 seconds to a minute.
Sure. Thanks, Linda. So micromobility can be a fantastic complement to transit, right? So most people won't ride their bikes in the snow. We still see about 10,000 rides on City Bike, even during our worst snow days. But most people will opt for transit when it's appropriate and will opt for micromobility on a beautiful spring day, for example. But we also see a lot of people who are, say, caregivers for young children or elderly relatives who can't just jump on a city bike because there's no child seat or sidecar or something like that. So we have to have options of transportation. We have to have multimodal options for every population so that they can take the right size vehicle for each time. And most of the time, they won't take a personally owned car if they have so many options to choose from. And so what we need to stress is the ability to use micromobility for the last mile, getting home from a subway station or a bus stop, for example, which could be about half a mile and could make the difference between someone taking a car or taking a subway a long distance. So I think it's crucial to see the interplay between these modes. And ideally, there could be a kind of free transfer between these modes. I know we're not there yet from a technical or political standpoint, but I would like to see that future come about so that people can have a kind of seamless way of getting around.
Exactly right. So we are unfortunately at the end of time. I know we could keep going on this conversation for quite a while, but again, want to extend another sincere thank you to everybody who participated on the panel today, everybody who joined in the audience. Hopefully it's clear to everybody that this is a really exciting initiative with a lot of potential to change people's lives today and to change the future of transportation in New York City. We'll be sending follow-up materials to everyone who's joined and everyone who intended to join. We encourage you to help us spread the word. And especially if you know of any corporate or philanthropic efforts whose priorities align with this one, we would love to talk with them. So thank you again, everybody, for joining today. You'll be hearing from us soon and have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Take
Thank
care.
See you,
you.
everyone.